They were recognized in previous years. And so we're going to bring one of those former gold medal winners right back up here. We're fortunate to have with us Dr. Noel Hacegaba, Chief Operating Officer for the Port of Long Beach, who's going to give us a port outlook.
Thank you so much. Well, good morning. It's so great to see all of you here in the LBC. So welcome to the Long Beach edition of the Global Supply Chain Excellence Summit. Yeah. And that applause goes to Nick and the team. They were recognized earlier today, but just imagine this. After 11 successful years of putting on an exceptional program on the campus of USC, it would have been very easy for them to say, let's just do it. We have the secret sauce, but they said, let's raise the bar. And they brought this amazing program here to Long Beach. And we could not be prouder to have this amazing event with a crowd, including harbor commissioners like Lee Williams and so many leaders in our industry, ILWU, like Danny and Mike, to have all of that come here to the center, ground zero of where the nation's largest gateway is, right in our backyard. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Now, one of the reasons I'm so excited about this summit is because this is where we get to hear from industry leaders, thought leaders, what is happening in the supply chain, and more importantly, what's coming up. This is where the future is being discussed before the future takes shape. And so what I'm going to say is give you a glimpse of the future as we see it from the Port of Long Beach. And I'm so glad to see many of my teammates who are here that are working day in and day out to make that future a reality at the Port of Long Beach. But before we talk about the future, let me just give you a quick recap of where we've been the last 12 months. And by the way, I titled this On Track for Tomorrow because at the Port of Long Beach, it's the year of rail. And you'll see in a few moments why it's rail. But here's a quick snapshot of our container volumes. 2020 was a watermark year for the Port of Long Beach. It was a watermark year for every port in the nation. It was the first time that the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach together handled 20 million TEU. Now just think about that, 20 million TEU. It was a number that just decades ago was unfathomable. The good news is that we handled it. Yes, the sites weren't pretty. We had 109 ships at anchor. The warehouses were busting at the seams, but our dock workers, ILWU longshore workers, moved all that cargo. Our truck drivers took those containers to the warehouses. Our railroads were working 24/7 to move all that cargo to the key inland markets. The good news is that 2024 is already shaping up to be another strong year. In fact, if you look on this slide, January through July, this slide is a little dated, but if you look at January through July at the Port of Long Beach, we're 20% ahead of last year. But here's the best part. All that volume is coming and it's being handled efficiently, but you don't see the same sights and scenes. You don't see 109 ships at anchor. You don't see that the warehouses are busting at the seams. Our dock workers are working hard. Everyone is leveraging that muscle memory that developed during the supply chain crisis. We think 2024 is going to be another watermark year. Maybe not as high as 9.3 million, but we think we're going to land somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 million TEU, which again shows the resurgence of the market. It shows the resilience of the American consumer, and it shows that we can handle the cargo here on the West Coast, specifically LA Long Beach. The freight rates demonstrate that. There's tightened demand. Orders are being advanced. A lot of shippers are hedging what may come on the East with regard to the labor contract there. The Panama Canal continues to be a factor. The Red Sea, not so much of a factor, but it is a factor. And all of that is leading to this surge that has begun months earlier than a traditional peak. It remains to be seen what's going to happen in Q4. I've heard different things from shipping lines. Some believe that we may see more of a muted Q4. But if you believe the earnings reports and some of the reports that were just released yesterday, just in time for this presentation, the retail sector remains very strong. And the nation's largest importer has announced that they're going to be revising their projections for the rest of the year upward. All indications that we're going to continue to see a strong market that will propel our ports. And as I mentioned ago, the big surprise throughout the supply chain crisis and beyond has been the resilience of the American consumer. We continue to buy, right? And that's really what's propelling our market. Inventory levels remain at adequate levels. If you look at the inventory to sales ratio, which gives us a sense of how much of that of those shipments are being kept in the warehouses, how long they're staying on the store shelves versus how fast consumers are buying them. You can see here that we're back to where we were before the pandemic-induced supply chain crisis. And here's another metric we keep a close eye on. The vacancy rate within the 2 billion square feet of warehouse and distribution center space in the Inland Empire. It's about 7.2%. This is a little dated, but I was talking to someone from CBRE this week who was telling me that if you look at a layer below that, if you look at the subleases, you'll find that that number is actually higher. That's one of the reasons why you don't see the same congestion, if you will, that you saw during the supply chain crisis, because there's adequate capacity in the warehouses, there's adequate capacity through and through the supply chain. Something else that we're keeping a close eye on, the alliances. We haven't seen a major shift in the alliances for quite some time, but last year it was announced that the 2M would be ending their partnership, which would leave MSC on its own, and Maersk announced that it would be joining forces with Hapag-Lloyd, forming the new Gemini cooperation. So far, that appears to be the only shift. It remains to be seen what other realignments may be coming soon as it relates to the ocean carrier alliances, the networks, and how they're going to be optimizing their capacity aboard the ship. So, ready to talk about the future? How many of you are baseball fans? Any baseball fans here? Do you remember this gentleman, Yogi Berra? He was known not so much for his play on the field, he was known for his malapropisms. Here's one of them. It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. Would you agree with that? But here's the good news, and this is why I love this summit. Check this quote out. Peter Drucker, one of the gurus of management, who said that the best way to predict the future is to what? It's create it. And that's what we do here at the summit each year. We create it, we shape it by talking to each other, exchanging information, looking to the future and asking, what will the customer need and how will we respond to meet that need? Thankfully, we have with the USC community people like Nick Vias, who writes books that gives us a preview of what's to come. In fact, this book was just released. I think, Nick, it's available today, right? Okay. You have to pick up this book because it's the only book, to my knowledge, that actually talks about supply chain design network in the post-pandemic world. And basically what this book says is that in the future, supply chains to be successful and efficient are going to have to be resilient, they're going to have to be agile, they're going to have to be sustainable, reliable, and predictable. And the only way you're going to be able to get there is if you design it as part of a broader network, the system of systems, as my good friend Fran Inman likes to say. Here's the better news. Thanks in large part to the supply chain crisis, ports went from being invisible to being infamous because everyone was blaming the ports for all the congestion. Then we became important enough for Washington and Sacramento to recognize the important value of ports to the nation's economy. And so in November of 2021, President Biden signed the bipartisan infrastructure law, $1.2 trillion. And since that day, the federal administration has been working fast and furious to make these competitive grant programs available. Not to be left behind, our own state of California, our governor signed and allocated $2.3 billion in the 22-23 fiscal year budget for goods movement and supply chain. That's the single largest allocation in the state of California budget on goods movement and supply chain. But the better news for us, and I'm proud to share, and many of my colleagues from the Port of Long Beach are here, who were instrumental in getting us this. In the year 2023, calendar year 2023, Port of Long Beach received $792 million between the federal government and the state government. And as you can see, the checks were pretty big. $565 million is going to go towards our Pier B on-dock rail support facility, also known as America's Green Gateway. And the balance is going to support our transition to zero emissions operations, which is another big initiative that we're so excited about. So how are we going to spend this money that we just got? Over the next 10 years, we're going to be investing $2.3 billion. And that's on top of $4.5 billion that we've invested in our infrastructure at the Port of Long Beach over the last 12 or 13 years. And this is how we plan to invest it. Over half of it is going to support our strategic shift to rail. We believe that in the future, if in order to handle more container volumes, we're going to have to move more of that out of the port terminal on rail. And you'll see that the balance of that is a series of different investments to upgrade our infrastructure, our facilities, and again, a big portion of that is to support our transition to zero emissions. Let me tell you a little bit about our Pier B on-dock rail support facility. It's the centerpiece of our rail development project. And what you see there highlighted is the guts of it. That's where we're going to take 12 existing rail tracks and we're going to amplify that to 48. Now you say, why is the Port of Long Beach building one of the nation's largest rail yards in the nation inside your port? Because this is the only way that our 6 container terminals are going to be able to efficiently and securely move more of those containers as they're discharged from the ship right onto a train, thanks to PHL and our Class 1 partners, and move those containers out of our port complex. It's faster, it's safer, it's more sustainable. And just about 4 weeks ago, we were honored to have U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and members of Congress and leadership at the state of California level join us for the groundbreaking of Pier B. I mean, this project, as the Secretary said, checks off all the boxes. When you look at predictability, velocity, sustainability, the reduction in emissions, it just checks off all the boxes. And this is why we call it America's Green Gateway. Now, thankfully, our Class 1 partners are doing their part so that we can maximize the investments we're making within the Port of Long Beach. BNSF Railway a couple summers ago announced their plans to develop a 4,100-acre site in West Barstow that will be their staging operation to handle all those containers that we ship directly on rail to this site. It will have a rail yard, it will have an intermodal facility, it will have warehousing, it will support the movement of trains from San Pedro Bay to Barstow and then beyond to the key inland markets. Union Pacific is also looking at ways to optimize the rail network. In fact, a few years ago, we etched out an agreement with Union Pacific where we would agree to collaborate to send more containers that arrive into our port complex to the Intermountain region in Salt Lake City as the hub in order to move more of those containers that typically get there via truck. I mean, just to give you an idea, there are about 2 million TEU a year that arrive into our port that ultimately end up in that Intermountain region where Salt Lake City is the hub. 90% of those containers get there via truck. But imagine if we can shift the ratio and move more of those containers out of our port complex to Salt Lake City on a train versus a truck. Imagine how much truck power we can keep here in Southern California. Imagine how many chassis we won't have to be searching for. And imagine the efficiency gains if we can do this on rail. These are some of the ideas. These are some of the partnerships that we're striking in order to maximize the benefits of projects like Pier B. Now, speaking of rail, at our grand opening for Pier B, we also showcased North America's first zero-emission switcher locomotive. Yes. So when you talk about the future, this is what the future looks like. One day, in the not-so-distant future, every locomotive is going to look like this. And this is the kind of stuff that we need to start working on together to get us there faster. But that's not it. The ports of LA and Long Beach have these aggressive industry-leading goals. By 2030, we want 100% zero-emissions cargo handling equipment. At the Port of Long Beach today, we're at about 22%. So we've got a little work ahead of us, But the good news is that all that funding that was released over the last couple of years, the incredible support of our marine terminal operators, our ocean carriers, those companies that own these operations here, they're stepping up. They're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in order to help us in this transition. Trucks, by 2035, our goal is to hit 100% zero emissions trucks. Now, our progress on that front's a little slower. I mean, just to give you an idea, there are about 23,000 trucks in the port registry. That covers the ports of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach. As of last week, there were only about 360 trucks that were zero emission. So we've got a way to go. But here's the good news. Again, that funding, the partnership by our motor carriers and the companies that support them has been incredible, and I have every confidence that we'll get there eventually. This is why I like this quote. Have you ever heard this? What does it say? Teamwork makes the dream work. And so far, everything I've been telling you 20 years ago was just a dream. Some people were saying it was a pipe dream, but it's already shaping out here in LA Long Beach. Isn't that amazing? Thanks to all of you in this room. And it's going to take more teamwork to get us there faster. Let me give you an idea or just a glimpse of what this looks like for us. In the Port of Long Beach, thanks to strong partners like Forum Mobility and Watt EV and Zeem and Forgent Logistics, we have today 100 publicly available charging stations. Now you say 100 is not nearly enough. We recognize that, but that's 100 more than we had last year. And we're on track to install another couple hundred over the next 3 to 4 years. And when you look at what's going to happen outside the port complex regionally, and some of the funding that our partners like AQMD and CARB are getting to support investments in infrastructure outside the port, then we're going to start seeing those synergies actually raise the bar when it comes to availability of infrastructure to power all this equipment that we're going to need to meet our goals. Let's talk about ships for a moment. Anyone here know anything about ships? I see many carriers here, Stephanie being one of them, right? And Michelle represents them. So over the years, what we as ports have done is we've used the carrot approach. We've used, okay, how can we incentivize our ocean carrier partners to invest in cleaner fuels, to slow steam, to reduce emissions? And they've been pretty successful. Our Green Ship Incentive Program, our Green Flag Vessel Speed Program, one of the things that makes me proud when I visit our ocean carrier customers overseas at their headquarters is I often see that green flag that we awarded them for being a partner in this program. But we're looking at other things too. We were the first gateway here in San Pedro Bay to install shore power. This is something that goes back over 10 years now. And the latest iteration of this collaboration is what we call the green shipping corridors, where we're partnering with ports on the other end of the Pacific, like Singapore. And we're working with them and all of our partners, the shipping lines, the terminal operators, the equipment providers, to make sure that we're having a cohesive dialogue about how we're going to get to zero emissions, cleaner fuels faster. We're doing the same thing with Shanghai. And we're working with the world's largest ports. We're working with the world's largest ocean carriers who carry not just the greatest influence, but have access to the greatest resources to help us get there faster. Hydrogen. We know that battery electric is a low-hanging fruit. Battery electric is what's going to get us there faster. But we believe that hydrogen has a play in this as well. In fact, some would argue that hydrogen is the more long-term sustainable solution. The challenge with hydrogen is it's a little expensive right now, and it's not totally green. So if we want to get to zero emissions, we need to figure out the proper way to have a supply chain, not just to generate it, but to store it and to distribute it in the greenest fashion possible. And this is why we're proud to be part of the Arches Coalition, an effort led by the state of California. And we are one of 8 hubs across the country where we're going to be working together hand in hand to make sure that we deploy these hydrogen projects as quickly as possible. This is why we're also looking at offshore wind. Now, one of the questions we often get is, why is a port dabbling in offshore wind? What's the nexus? What's the connection? And the answer is simple. We're going to need as much power as we can get. And if the power doesn't exist, we have to go create it. Now, I want to be clear, we're not talking about installing these massive wind turbines here on our shore, okay? We're not going to install them here. All we want to do is create the real estate so that these massive pieces of equipment can be staged, assembled, and manufactured. And this is what Pure Wind's about. It's about us working together with the state of California to help the state meet its own goal of generating 25 gigawatts of offshore wind power by the year 2045. And let me give you an example of what this looks like. Each of these wind turbines will be as tall as 1,100 feet, as tall as the Eiffel Tower. And we think we'll need about 1,300 of these units in order to help meet the state's need, and each one generating 25 gigawatts. Now, 25 gigawatts is a lot of juice. In fact, 25 gigawatts is enough electricity to power over 25 million homes. Just think about that for a second. And if we here in Southern California, in San Pedro Bay, can help the state meet its goal, imagine who benefits. Everyone does. Not just the maritime supply chain, everyone, commuters, residents, because we're all going to need access to that power, access to that renewable power. Here's a schedule and cost. Nothing is cheap and nothing is free. Remember that from your economics professor? No such thing as a free lunch. There's nothing free in the port environment, believe me. So this is going to take a little while, and it's going to take about $5 billion. That's a little more than what we have. When we're already investing in our transition to zero emissions, we're investing in rail, right? So we're optimistic that the private sector once again will step up, and we'll have a willing partner that says, we believe in this vision. We believe that this is what California needs, and we want to partner with you. So that's where we're actively working with our partners as well as labor to make this dream a reality. And this is a rendering, by the way. This is not the actual Pure Wind. This is what we believe this is going to look like with all those pieces of equipment atop the surface of this 400-acre site that we would develop just south of the Navy Mall at Pier T, all landfill. Speaking of infrastructure, it's not just the physical infrastructure that we're investing in. In order for us to prepare for the future, we need to make sure that we're digitally connected. And this is why we're moving forward with our supply chain information highway. We're building, adding additional features like we released late last year. And we're working with Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Oakland, Port Hueneme, Port of San Diego, all of California's container ports to make sure that as we build our respective systems, that they're going to be interoperable. They can talk to each other so that the data between them can be shared seamlessly. And we're going to be working with the Port of Los Angeles. We're in the middle of work of a project where we're going to be deploying a universal appointment system so that our drainage partners can book appointments across the complex through one source instead of going to 13 different websites. Yes. So where's tomorrow? Where's tomorrow? It's just ahead, right? And if you wait for the future to unfold, it's too late. This is why we got to start talking about the future today. And again, this is why summits like these are so important. And this is why it's so important that as we invest in our infrastructure, we invest in equipment, we invest in digital, we also have to continually invest in our workforce. We will not leave our workforce behind. We will need to make sure that we invest in our physical capital, we invest in our human capital. Make sure that we're reskilling them, we're upskilling them, preparing the workforce for the jobs of tomorrow today. And this is why, again, we're partnering with ILWU, with PMA, the Port of Los Angeles, the California Workforce Agency, to develop the state-of-the-art goods movement training facility that is in the process of being designed as we speak. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I went through this rather quickly. I want to give a quick shout out to the World Trade Center in Long Beach as well. Our partner, this partner is helping the Port of Long Beach get the message out, promote what we do, and make sure that we're making connections between industry, city, and all the business community. So to make sure that we're leveraging every possible opportunity to generate that economic development opportunity. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude my presentation and Wink. Do I have time for questions or should I hand you back the mic? Yeah.
You'll be around at the break?
I'll be around.
Okay, so people can ask you questions.
They can. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you all very much. Yeah.
Wow, Noel, I only have one word. Wow.